start? Do you want me to come back to whatever points was raised yesterday, or?
I did have just a question. Sure. Will probably unfold, but some thinking about like, are we going to go into why they're holding so tightly? Why these philosophers are holding so tightly onto this view of the body? Like, I have a sense it has to do with maybe the Cartesian split, but what is your thinking of why they need so desperately to hold on to this? Because it seems like they're all in agreement in one way or another, and it's a mode of
yes, I understand.
Yeah.
And I think it is the question, and as you can imagine, there's no simple answer to it, because you can think of many reasons.
And I think it would be hard to extrapolate that, but given, I would love to think about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so there are many reasons. I will just try to develop one, which for me is perhaps the most convincing. Even if there are, again, several possible others. In fact, life as such has become, in contemporary recent philosophy, has become a concept. Well, in fact, very recently. Okay? So it started with Foucault and Biopolitics, and then went on with Agamben and Derrida, etc. And before then, I mean, before the 80s, let's say, life was considered a very metaphysical concept. Okay? So we were dealing, in philosophy, we were dealing with existence, as I said yesterday, not with life. Life was either a metaphysical concept, like in Descartes or Aristotle or Bergson, like animated life, essential life, or it was a biological concept, but not a deconstructed one. And then Foucault brought life back onto the scene because of biopower and biopolitics, and then a new exploration of life developed, which was supposed to be a non-metaphysical, a new approach to life, deconstructive and deconstructed one. And for example, in Derrida, it's very clear. His last words were always prefer life. And in the most recent books, the concept of life became more important perhaps than the one of existence. So the question is, how is it possible to elaborate a concept of life which would be let's say, critical, that is not attached to the metaphysical tradition? What is a deconstructed and deconstructed concept of life? So a non-metaphysical, non-classical, a life which would be distinct from the divine life, from something sacred and substantial, etc. What is it? And according to me, the problem is that the failure is at that level. Because, again, I think that if you want to produce this new concept of life, this deconstructive concept of life, then you have to take biology into account. There's no other choice. You have to take material life into account. Otherwise, it will remain a very metaphysical concept, like the life of the soul, etc., etc. So you have to take biological life into account. So this is what they're trying to do. Really want to get rid of certain distinctions, like the symbolic biological one. But the failure is at that level. And I don't know if it's possible anyway. Is it possible to really produce a materialist concept of life today? That is what is at stake, and this is, according to me, what they fail at presenting. Because you're asking why? Because I think they have. We'll see that with Agamben today. They have this idea of biology as. Yesterday we started to talk about that as a very repressive normative discourse. So they're very defiant regarding the biological definition of life, which for them remains very, yes, repressive in a way, very repressive, and biology itself acting as a political, dangerous science. And the last chapter of Agamben is all about Nazism and the Nazi use of biology. And they can't, you're asking me why, I don't know. They can't get rid of this. For them, biology means instrumentalization of the living, it means experimentation, it means domestication, it means domination, genetic manipulations. This is what biology means. Okay? They only see the biotechnological side of life. Biology means the capacity, the possibility of instrumentalizing the living being, manipulating it, transforming it, killing it. It's a death power. Biology is a death power. It's about trafficking living beings. It's about changing the genome, acting on the natural pseudonym. That they can't get rid of this vision of biology as Heidegger. I think the problem is Heidegger. they stick to him. Agamben, we'll read this morning the return of Agamben to Heidegger. In the last instance, in Heidegger, said cybernetics and biology are one and the same. So, in the same way that cybernetics is disciplining, normalizing human spirit, let's say, and human thought, biology is normalizing the living. So, you see?
Yeah, but it also feels like, even beyond that, it feels like there is an extreme sort of fear and hatred of the body itself. And it feels like there's not this, like an enchantment of thought. It feels like that brings them down. It's repressed. The body itself brings down the transcendence and like the metaphysical. It's like too.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that there's this hatred for the body in Foucault and Deleuze, or Derrida. It would be unfair, I guess. I don't think it's really that. I don't think they hate the body. I don't think it's the problem.
Yeah.
No.
Is there a fear though?
Is the fear of the risk of being normalized, instrumentalized by biology. Okay? And this fear of biology, you find, has also a philosophical root, which is that the notion of natural life, of biological life, let aside biology itself, the very notion of natural life is suspicious. Right? It's suspicious because we don't know what it is. We don't really know what it is to be alive. It's impossible to define. As you know, there's no definition of life. That's the problem. It is a concept without definition. If you try to define what life is, you won't be able to do so. You have criteria of life, like reproduction, teleology, etc. Breathing, so you have criteria, you don't have a definition. You couldn't explain what to be alive means. It is impossible. Okay? It is a concept without definition. So for them, it is suspicious. So, and yet they're trying. It's very, very manifest in philosophy since about 30 years now. They're trying to elaborate a new concept of life. So it's ambiguous. On the one hand, there's this fear of biology and this inability to define life, and on the other hand, there's a clear attempt at putting life at the center of the new reflection. So it gives this ambiguous discourse that I'm trying to. So are there other? Yes.
I'm just curious if you could say a few words about how religion falls into this, because in a lot of religions you see a dualism in spirit and body, and but they also at the same time try to internalize norms or rules within individuals. And I was wondering if this complicates perhaps a little bit the approach we saw yesterday of the new societies doing away with the dualism and also at the same time internalizing norms.
I think the text which deals very clearly with life and religion is the Faith and Knowledge by Derrida. I don't think Foucault talks about that anywhere. And Agamben, we'll come back to that with the problem of the sacred, homo sacra, but it's not exactly religion. So the only text which clearly, thematically deals with this problem is Derrida's Faith and Knowledge. It is something like, what is a religious concept of life? Religious concept of life means that, the sacralization of life. Life is sacred, and to this extent you can't touch it. So it is what Derrida calls immunization of life. So religion is an operation of immunization of life. So you declare that life is untouchable. To this extent, life as such is not, there's no norm coming in this immunization. It's just the respect of the living being per se. You don't touch it. But at the same time, and this is what is so interesting in Derrida's text, this immunization is at the same time a process of instrumentalization, because in fact Derrida shows that there can't be any immunity without a destruction of what is supposed to be untouchable. So Derrida will show in a very complex way, in a very interesting way, that at the same moment when religion says we don't want to touch what life has to be protected and sacred, it is the most normative discourse, because at the same time it destroys what it tends to protect. Okay, that's why in fact religion will produce concepts of normal life. They will exclude some forms of life from the domain of the immune, etc., etc. So in fact the problem there that is addressing in Faith and Knowledge is it possible to protect life? This should be the task of religion. Is it possible to protect life against any attack? This is what religion should do, and this is what it fails at doing. Because in fact it is totally normativist. Yes, but we'll come back to that on Sunday. So yes, the problem, and this also pertains to your question, is if we want, talking about life in philosophy should amount to protecting life. We should produce a discourse of protection, immunization of life. We should be able to protect life against any kind of destruction, right? Even against biology. Right? We should produce a concept of life which is not, which remains outside of any kind of instrumentalization, technologization, and biology, including biology. Right? I think this is the reason why they want to immunize. Derrida, I think, is right, has the right word. They want to show that life is something untouchable. It is the untouchable. But of course, I think nothing is untouchable. I think it's impossible to produce such a concept. I mean, to protect life against any kind of intervention, manipulation, etc., including religious ones. I don't think it's possible.
If you collapse the distinction between biological life and symbolic life, wouldn't the working upwards from the biology into the symbolic be a possible way to go, rather than down from the symbolic
Yes.
into the biology?
Yes.
Wouldn't that create it? And so then if they fuse, wouldn't that create a whole different notion of what the symbolic is, and maybe
Of course.
separation would be
Yeah.
the same?
And this is what I will try to develop in conclusion. Yeah. How the biological itself, I mean, how from within biology it is possible to perhaps build a new concept of the symbol. Of course. Okay, so I think we'll come deeper into these questions this morning with Agamben's book. And I will have the same approach than the one I had yesterday, showing that he wants to do, well, showing what he wants to do on the one hand, and showing perhaps the contradictions, or let's say the problems or the paradoxes which are secretly present in the work. So he wrote that book, Agamben wrote that book in 1997, called Homo Sacer, Sovereign Power and Bare Life. So yesterday I said a few words about bare life, the concept of bare life, which is introduced by Agamben. It is his concept. And, well, the problem is very simple. The problem I will address today is very simple. Bare life equates biological life in Agamben. I will come back to the definition, precise definition in a moment. But bare life means biological, natural life. So Agamben will show that this reality of life, material reality of life, is not symbolic. Okay? So it introduces the distinction between bare life and political or symbolic life. Again, I will come back to the distinction in a moment. Okay? So bare life should be material and natural, empirical, etc. life. But I will show that, in fact, bare life, according to me, or perhaps it's a possible approach, is just another name, or a new name, for symbolic life. And that perhaps it expresses the symbolic life even more than its opposite, which is bios or bios. So again, I will challenge this notion of bare life to show that Agamben, and we'll try to understand why precisely, is not really able to touch, this is the problem of touching again, to touch the untouchable, which is life. At the last moment, you find this, you remember yesterday I was talking about this impossibility to reach, in the end, the object of the research. There's something which limits, which is a kind of prohibition, last moment prohibition, which prevents him from touching the materiality of life. So in order to explain that, I will develop 3 points. The first one will be precisely the distinction, bare life and political life. My second point will be about the sacred. What does sacred mean? And sacre in particular in the title. What is Agamben's definition of the sacred? And of course, life again has something to do with the sacrality. We were just talking about religion a moment ago. So how does Agamben deal with this notion of the sacred, etc.? And the third part will be about biology. The last part of the book is all about some contemporary biology. It starts, we can say, let me see. Yeah, I think we'll go. Yes, sorry. Yes, the whole part, you have the politicization of life, and then biopolitics, and then life that does not deserve to live, politics of giving form to life, politicizing death, and we'll come back to that, the camp as nomos, so the whole, let's say, the 5 last chapters of the book are intertwining political issues and an approach to contemporary biology. So it's the last 5 chapters are about the political meaning of biology. You will see that he's much more radical, even more radical than Foucault, about the political importance of biology and about its destructive power. It goes much further than Foucault on that point. So this will be my last point. What is biology for Agamben? Okay, so let's start with the first point. So the difference between 2 concepts of life. We will read for that one the 4 first pages of the book, introduction. He says that Foucault addressed a major question in the history of sexuality about when he defined biopolitics, exactly what we did yesterday. He says that he acknowledged Foucault for having really brought to light an essential concept, which is biopolitics, and for having explained that life has become a major political concept. Michel Foucault is on page 3, the second paragraph. Michel Foucault refers to this very definition, which is life.
Page 10 of the English text.
What is the English text?
Yeah, I have 3.
Oh, you have different editions?
Yeah, or maybe it's the...
Oh, so it won't be easy.
What page are you
So it's introduction. It's like, you know, the first page. And yeah, page 3. The paragraph starts with Michel Foucault. So at the moment it's simple. We'll see if it's as easy. Okay. So Michel Foucault refers to this very definition when, at the end of the first volume of the History of Sexuality, he summarizes the process by which, at the threshold of the modern era, so we see era, we saw yesterday was 17th century, natural life begins to be included in the mechanisms and calculations of state power, and politics turns into biopolitics. For millennia, he writes, man remained what it was for Aristotle, a living animal with the additional capacity for political existence. Modern man is an animal whose politics calls his existence as a living being into question. Okay, so you remember all that. According to Foucault, a society's threshold of biological modernity is situated at the point at which the species and the individual as a simple living body become what is at stake in a society's political strategies. Okay, so you can recognize everything we dealt with yesterday. So modernity as the emergence of biopolitics. What is biopolitics? It's the moment when life is included into mechanisms of power. And what is life? Life means both the individual life, we are living bodies, and also collective life, we are part of a population, or of a species. So Agamben will start on this basis, okay? And yet, he feels the need to, as he says, radicalize Foucault's analysis of biopower. Let's present immediately the problem. So it's the following page. You see, the next paragraph, almost 20 years before the history of sexuality, the end of the paragraph. And there's a reference to Hannah Arendt, and then the end of the paragraph on page 4, end of first paragraph. And it is most likely these very difficulties that account for the curious fact that Arendt establishes no connection between her research in the human condition and the penetrating analysis she had previously devoted to totalitarian power, in which a biopolitical perspective is altogether lacking, and that Foucault, in just as striking a fashion, never dwelt on the exemplary places of modern biopolitics, the concentration camp and the structure of the great totalitarian states of the 20th century. So this is the problem for Agamben. If we need to radicalize, well, he absolutely agrees with Foucault on the basis of biopolitics, as we just saw, but something is lacking, he says. Something is lacking in both Arendt and Foucault. And what is lacking is that they don't clearly establish the link between biopolitics and totalitarian power. Okay? So Foucault is not radical enough in his analysis of biopower, because the culmination of biopower, the extreme of biopower, is Nazism, and Foucault remains, let's say, silent in that point. There are some, I said yesterday, there are some passages of Foucault about Hitler in Governmentality. The seminar is called Governmentality, but it is true that it is only a few passages. And not, well, Foucault, it is true, never said biopolitics is Nazism. Or biopolitics is the structure of Western politics. It does not necessarily lead to Nazism. And Agamben says, no, we have to say that the essence of Western power, the essence of sovereignty, is totalitarianism. How do you say that? Totalitarianism? Totalitarianism. Okay? The essence of Western politics. Okay? So it is not only totalitarianism is not only, let's say, a deviation of biopolitics. It is not only an extreme of biopolitics. It is the very essence of sovereignty. Okay? The logic of biopolitics is totalitarianism. Okay? So this is the thesis. And we'll see that in this logic, biology plays a major role. This wouldn't be possible, totalitarianism wouldn't be possible without the contribution, collaboration of biology. Okay, so it is a very violent critique of biology and its political role. So now we're dealing with something much more radical than yesterday. You see, the essence of Western politics, the essence of sovereignty, is the extreme form of totalitarianism, and the structure of the biopolitical is the camp, concentration camp. That's very clear. And of course, Agamben will show that even in our current democracies, this structure of totalitarianism and the camp are still present. It has not disappeared. It's just taken another form, but it's still present. All right. So of course he has to justify himself. What does he say? Such a thing, which is extremely violent and extreme. So I will try to justify the distinction between the two forms of life. What is the link between what he says to start with, like about the two forms of life, and this notion of totalitarianism? So the two forms of life are defined in the first page. It's the very beginning of the book. The Greeks had no single term to express what we mean by the word life. They used two terms that, also traceable to a common etymological root, are semantically and morphologically distinct. Zoe, which expressed the simple fact of living, common to all living beings, animals, men, or gods, and bios, which indicated the form or way of living proper to an individual or a group. Okay. when Plato mentions 3 kinds of life in the Philebus, and when Aristotle distinguished the contemplative life of the philosopher from the life of pleasure and the political life in the Nicomachean Ethics, neither philosopher would ever have used the term zoe, which in Greek significantly enough lacks a plural. This follows from a simple fact that what was at issue for both thinkers was not at all simple natural life, but rather a qualified life, a particular way of life. Concerning God, Aristotle can certainly speak of zoe aristeikai eidios, a more noble and eternal life, but only insofar as he means to underline the significant truth that even God is a living being. Similarly, Aristotle uses the term zoe in the same context, and in a way that is just as meaningful to define the act of thinking. But to speak of a zoe politicae of the citizens of Athens would have made no sense. Okay? So we can stop here. So 2 concepts of life. The Greeks had 2 concepts of life. The first one, zoe, which you find in zoology, zoo, which according to Agamben means, you can see that, the simple fact of living. This is the first definition. There are others, we'll see. The simple fact of living. We can give now the other definition that we can find in the book, naked life, on page 75, and biological life. Okay, so we have on the one hand zoe, simple fact of living. Okay, so and the other definitions are naked life, which is also bare, sometimes bare life, naked life or bare life. And the concept of bare life is taken from Benjamin, Walter Benjamin, who proposes this notion somewhere in his work. So naked life or bare life, or biological life. Okay? So if we follow that concept of zoe, we can see that it does not apply to a simple one category of living, but to all of them, including men, animals, and gods, the simple fact of being alive. As opposed to, or as different from, another concept, which is bios, and which means qualified life, or a way of life. Okay? And for example, political life. And the life of the citizen is bios. The major example is political life. So if we want to come back to my distinction, to yesterday's distinction, this would be symbol. This would be bios, would be symbol of life. And, well, for example, being a philosopher is a symbol, is a bios. Yes?
Would it be possible to quickly say something about what Benjamin meant by bare life, or how he?
It appears somewhere. It appears somewhere in the book. Well, the same thing. The same thing. That is, what was he? The life which is exposed to death, pure exposure. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Yes, it's 2 concepts of life. And as you see, Agamben says, the Greek wouldn't have said political zoe. I have a political bios, but not political zoe. Or I'm a philosopher, cannot be a zoe. It is a bios. It is a way of life. It is the way in which you live your life. So it is the symbolic life. So you see that he introduces this distinction, and it is the first critique of Foucault. It implies that Foucault wasn't cautious enough with this concept of bios, which is too massive, which is not differentiated. What is the need for that distinction? Well, Agamben says if this distinction is not present in contemporary philosophy, it is for a very good reason. It is because it is impossible to talk about their life. Okay? Every time in philosophy you want to approach life, we will always talk about bios, qualified life, but never about their life. Natural life is what escapes the realm of the concept. Natural life is what is always excluded from the domain of life in general. And that's why Foucault has never talked about it. But this exclusion of their life, the fact that nobody ever talks about that, this exclusion of their life has a profound political meaning. It says, bare life, this will appear on chapter 2, bare life is what can only be included by its exclusion. It can only exist, bare life can only exist as a concept. It can only exist negatively, it can only exist because it is excluded from the domain of life. It is included by its exclusion. So, look at page 7. It appears at the end of the first paragraph, page 7. We must look at the two last sentences of page 7, which is still in the introduction. I don't know. So, I don't know if you can find it. And Agamben says, we must instead ask why Western politics first constitutes itself through an exclusion, which is simultaneously an inclusion of bare life. What is the relation between politics and life if life presents itself as what is included by means of exclusion? Okay, so this is very clear here. We must instead ask why Western politics constitutes itself through an exclusion, which is simultaneously an inclusion of their life. What is the relation between politics and life if life presents itself as what is included by means of an exclusion? So this is the very difficulty of Agamben's text, is to understand this logic of inclusion, exclusion of a certain concept of life in Western politics, and consequently also in Western theory or philosophy or science, let's say theory as such, okay? Every time we talk about life, in a way, it is exactly the same point of departure as the one of this seminar. It's exactly the same thing. Why are we always excluding natural life from our discourse? Why does natural life, the simple fact of living, always escape when we try to define what life is? Why are we able to only produce a symbolic concept of life, never a natural one? Okay? Why do we leave natural life outside, or why do we exclude it every time we want to talk about it? For example, Foucault, according to Agamben, talks about life, but when he talks about life, he talks about bios, never about bare life as such. about the natural, the simple fact of living. Something in the naturality or materiality of life always escapes, in a way, and perhaps Agamben is right, I don't know, it is impossible to talk about natural life. It is impossible to not to exclude it, not to reject it from the realm of the concept. Okay? So the only thing we're able to talk about explicitly is bios, that is way of life, that is political life, that is symbolic life. Okay? The only discourse we're able to produce is the discourse of symbolic life, but we can't really approach, we can't touch, again, this notion of touching is very important, I guess. We cannot touch the materiality of life. It is always excluded. And yet, this is what we will try to do here in that book. Agamben says, I want to understand this inclusion-exclusion logic. I want to understand why this impossibility, and I want to get over it. I want to create a way of talking, the possibility of talking about their life, about the materiality of life, without immediately erasing it without overpowering it with the symbolic life. Okay? All right? So do you have any question at that point? Is that clear? So, of course, you understand my question is Agamben succeeding in producing this discourse on bare life, which is not an exclusion?
I have one question.
Yes?
But by making this split, isn't this to some extent the exact opposite movement of the deconstruction of the two bodies? It seems to me like it's almost the reconstitution of the two bodies that Foucault was trying in the symbolic and the physical body of the king. Or is he just making this distinction to overcome it?
Yeah, to overcome it. Yeah. We shouldn't make that distinction in a way. We have to make it because it has a meaning according to him in Greek philosophy. But we should be able to overcome it. Okay? And until now we didn't succeed in overcoming it because we were still we've never been able to produce a discourse which would overcome that distinction. Okay? But of course the aim is to produce a kind of, he says we have to produce the Zoe of bios. It's the last page of the book. So what is the relationship between this and concentration camp? What is how can we understand this introduction, which is very complex? We start with this distinction, bios and Zoe, and then a few pages after, 2 pages after, we have Arendt and Foucault were able to radicalize the discourse and show that biopolitics is totalitarianism. What is the relationship? And here we have to understand that, in fact, what Agamben does, it is very complex, so I will patiently develop the argument. It is not so much about life. Okay? It is not so much about life. You have to understand that these distinctions, of course, are distinctions within the concept of life, but in fact, these are distinctions which concern the concept of death. What Agamben has in mind in producing this distinction is the notion of death. What the concentration camp has, in a way, taught us, if we can use this expression, is that their life, which was the life of the prisoners, like natural fact of life, like people who are just exposed to death, which had no bios anymore because they didn't have any way of life. They were just treated as their lives, naked people, and in that sense Benjamin is talking about naked life. Like they were reduced to their naturality. What this experience, if we can use that term again, taught us is that what is bare life? I said it is impossible to define life. You remember? It is impossible to define the concept of life. What is life? What is natural life? What is biological life? What is bare life? Bare life is the life which is exposed to death. This is what Agamben, this is the minimal definition Agamben will propose of life, exposed to death. But you will tell me, yes, but bios is also exposed to death. Yes, but there are two ways of understanding the exposure to death. One is, and this is bios, the existential exposure, the one that Heidegger had defined in Being in Time. To the same, well, in the same manner, in the same way that there is a way of life, there is also a way of dying. This is what Heidegger explains. Okay. In a way, you're fashioning your own life, which also means that you're fashioning your own death. And this is what Heidegger describes under the name of being towards death. Okay? There's a kind of qualified way of dying. Right? Which has something to do with the meaning of life and the meaning of death. Right? Fashioning the meaning of existence. Agamben says, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about another kind of exposure to death, which is the exposure of naked life to death. And in that sense, there is no meaning implied. He says, bare life is killable life. Le concept de vie tuable. In Italian, I don't know what it is. The life that can be killed, which is totally different from mortality. I don't know if you can, it's difficult to explain. Life which is killable. And in that sense, there's no choice, there's no fashioning, there's no way of qualifying such a life. It is you understand why he uses the word naked or bare. It is the total exposure and fragility of life, which is absolutely exposed to murder, to the possibility of being killed. And it is true that Heidegger never talks about that. Heidegger never talks about murder in Being in Time. It's all about the way that I'm dying, that is, I'm walking towards death and fashioning in a way my own style of living in a body. And Agamben says, if we want to produce a concept of natural life, we have to go to the other extreme, which is death. And natural life, what is natural life? What is biological life? And I quite agree with this definition. Biological life is the life that can be killed, which is defined by its total absence of defense. Okay? Total absence of fashion, in a way. You understand what I mean? Okay? The raw thing, naked, bare. Alright? So, if Foucault wasn't radical enough in his analysis of bios biopolitics, it is because he never talks about death, of course, but he never makes that distinction between two ways of living, which are also two ways of dying. Authentic one, like the one Heidegger talks about, as I said, fashioning your own style, your own way of dying, and the inauthentic one, which is the simple exposure to death, the simple possibility of being killed. And now you understand the very structure of Nazism. Why does Agamben talk about the concentration camp as being the archetype of modern violence? Is because the concentration camp is making manifest the very essence of their life, which is a life which is reduced to its nothingness in a way. Well, it is just the possibility of being killed. Okay. So it means that when we talk about biopolitics, and when Agamben is reminding us of Foucault's definition, for millennia, man remained what it was for Aristotle, a living animal with the additional capacity for political existence. Modern man is an animal whose politics calls his existence as a living being into question, which calls his existence as a living being into question. It means that biopolitics not only concerns our way of life, but also our killable life. Okay? When it says politics calls its existence as a living being into question, it means the living being in both senses of bios and zoe. Okay? It means that something in modern politics, even now, I mean, even in our current democracies, something is exposing us, something, well, the essence of sovereignty is, we're still exposed, even if we're not in a concentration camp, of course, but we're still exposed to murder. Okay? Biopolitics is a way of still, even today, exposing us to this possibility of being killed. And according to Agamben, this is what Foucault didn't say. This is what he didn't. This is what he failed to analyze. So it means that you remember Foucault said that in biopolitics means both the individual body and the fact of belonging to a species or a population, and it means that politics is investing our bodily functions, our conditions of life, material conditions of life, etc. But Agamben says it is not only that, it is also, biopolitics means that the state is, or the mechanisms of power are also threatening our bare life. There's something in modern politics which still exposes us to murder. There's something, what is biopolitics? It is not only that the state takes care of our body, of our health, etc. It is also that it invests our fragility. There's something in us all, which is still a remnant of the prisoner's conditions in the camp. There's something like our very fragility, or very being exposed as such, okay, which is at stake in modern politics. And this demands to be elaborated. Do you have questions about that?
So this distinction between Zoe and bios sounds a lot to me like the Lacanian concept of two deaths, of there being the physical death and the biological death. And I was just wondering if there was any relation or... I mean, perhaps it's not important for our project here.
Well, no, it is not exactly the same thing, because normally the distinction has already been made, you're right, between two kinds of life and two kinds of death. But it is not exactly this one that Agamben is trying to pinpoint, because for Lacan and for Heidegger as well, biological death, I mean the simple fact of dying, is considered as having no meaning, and for that reason being excluded from the realm of the human and the authentic. You understand what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That the symbolic way of dying, which is the authentic one, the one we were talking about in Heidegger being in time, etc. And there is the biological one, which is deprived of any meaning, and for that reason rejected from the realm of, well, let's say existence or the human. But here, Agamben says it is not what I'm trying to analyze is. What I'm trying to bring to light is not something which would be there's a meaningful death and a meaningless death. Or perhaps this is true, but we have to produce the meaning of this meaningless. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Precisely, he doesn't want to reject killable life, but on the contrary, to put it in the center of his analysis, at the center, you see? It's not a question of rejecting it, saying, oh, we're not interested in that because it is not authentic, it is not philosophical. Right? And precisely the problem is, what can a philosophical approach of this bare life and killable life is? What is that? How can it that be? Without immediately finding the usual way of dealing with it, like rejecting it, saying we're not concerned about that, that's for animals, but it does not concern us. Is there a way to produce a discourse? So he says, until very recently, Bios and Zoe, well, Zoe was always excluded. Nobody ever talked about that. We only talked about Bios. So it was included by its exclusion. Okay? Life presents itself as what is included by means of an exclusion. But with precisely the appearance of totalitarianism, all of a sudden, what is excluded appears as being included. Okay? I mean, the included exclusion appears, totally appears. This is the very essence of Nazism, for Agamben. That for the first time in history, Bios and Zoe absolutely coincide. Okay? Because men are reduced, the prisoners are reduced to their, let's say, nationality, animality, or whatever you want to call it. It means that Nazism reveals something in politics, which is the possibility of erasing that distinction. In reducing all kinds of ways of life, all kinds of existential choices or whatever, of reducing them to just the simple fact of living, of reducing everything to killable life. Okay? So, Agamben says, that now we know, since Nazism, that what had always been excluded, in fact, always existed. And the proof of that is Nazism, because in Nazism, Zoe and Bios are absolutely coinciding. Hence, the question of Agamben, and I will be done with the introduction. Now we know our task, our responsibility, is that we cannot exclude bare life any longer. Because now we know that it is impossible. That Nazism has revealed that Bios and Zoe were absolutely reducible to one another. That there's no possibility of maintaining this distinction any longer. Okay? There's no way of life without fragility. Every kind of existence reveals the fragility and the animality of our condition. There's no way of continuing and opposing the two forms of life, because the fragility, our exposure, our killability, if we can coin this expression, are always present. They are impossible to exclude now. Okay? So our responsibility is to produce a discourse on this coincidence, which is not totalitarian. Okay? We have to produce the counter discourse. Well, we have to contradict totalitarianism on the same basis, on its very basis. You understand what I mean? Okay? Bare life and qualified life are one and the same, they coincide. This is what modern politics has revealed to us. So we have to produce an emancipatory discourse about that coincidence. We have to produce another way of approaching the coincidence between the two forms of life. Look at page 9, where I will read two passages, 9 and 11. Look at the last paragraph. It's 2 pages before the end of the introduction. Last paragraph, page 9. If anything characterizes modern democracy as opposed to classical democracy, then it is that modern democracy presents itself from the beginning as a vindication and liberation of Zoe, and that it is constantly trying to transform its own bare life into a way of life and to find, so to speak, the bios of Zoe. Hence, too, modern democracy's specific aporia, it wants to put the freedom and happiness of man into play in the very place, bare life, that mark their subjection. Behind the long, strife-ridden process that leads to the recognition of rights and formal liberties stands once again the body of the sacred man with his double sovereign, his life that cannot be sacrificed, yet may nevertheless be killed. To become conscious of this aporia is not to belittle the conquest and accomplishments of democracy. It is rather to try to understand once and for all why democracy, at the very moment in which it seemed to have finally triumphed over its adversaries and reached its greatest height, proved itself incapable of saving Zoe, to whose happiness it had dedicated all its efforts from unprecedented rule. And I will just another passage and then explain. 11, last one paragraph, the end of last one paragraph. Nevertheless, until a completely new politics, that is, politics no longer founded on the exception of bare life, is at hand, every theory and every praxis will remain imprisoned and immobile, and the beautiful day of life will be given citizenship only either through blood and death or in the perfect senselessness to which the society of the spectacle condemns it. Very difficult passages also, but you see, well, what is at stake is that we know now, what we know thanks to biopolitics, is that we cannot, and this is the new philosophical task, this is our responsibility again, we cannot go on in separating symbolic life from biological life, okay? We cannot go on, because we know that there is no bios without zoe, okay? That it is impossible to go on affirming that symbolic life or qualified life can be separated from, excluded, as Agamben says, excluded from, can exclude, zoe. We cannot separate them anymore, saying, oh, we philosophers deal with bios, and zoe is for animals, and there's nothing to say about it. It's just a matter of biology. We're not concerned with that. We're concerned with the authenticity of life. Agamben says it is not possible to go on like this. If we go on like this, and this was the last passage I was reading, if we go on like this, all democratic achievements like recognition of rights, formal liberties, we're talking about indigenous rights, all that will collapse. Well, every political revendications, etc., all political accomplishments like freedom, liberties, etc., will fail as long as we won't reconcile life with itself and stop making the distinction between bios and zoe. But we can make the distinction because sometimes it's necessary. We have to show that they have the same basis, the same root. It means we cannot go on excluding the fragility and the killability of life. Otherwise, democracy is a failure. Okay? It means that we have, again, to give this coincidence between their life and zoe, we have to give it quite another meaning than the one Nazism has elaborated. And this is our task, because if we don't do it, Nazism will do it for us. Okay? If we're not counteracting you see what I mean? If we're not producing a very strong discourse on the coincidence between bios and zoe, then biopower will do it for us. Okay? And it will kill us like animals. Right? So he says we have to produce, which is very interesting, the bios of zoe. Our task as philosophers is to produce and to find, so to speak, he says, so to speak, the bios of zoe. Means that we have to produce a concept of their life. We philosophers, but it is also a political task, of course. It does not concern the only philosophers. We have to produce, all of us, a satisfactory concept of their life.
I'm wondering whether Levin has also had a contribution to this project with this concept of visage and this exposure to death.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's this way.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're right that it is very interesting. It is true that Levinas talks about the face as being something which is totally exposed in its fragility to murder, to but totally exposed. And he says, in order to understand what the face is, we have to think about animals and women. The femininity of the face, etc. For Levinas, it means the total fragility, like the openness. Something which is without defense and without something you can penetrate violently, because there's no doors and no defense. So in that sense, you're quite right. I think that bare life and what Levinas defines as the face have many common characteristics. In that sense, this is true. But for Levinas, as you know, the very place, the very locus of that temporality, of that face, of this fragility, is also the very root of ethics. We were talking about ethics yesterday. For Agamben, there is not even this. I mean, it's... Levinas has this very curious sentence on totality and infinity. He says, the other is the one I cannot want to kill. So even if I kill the other, I have to overcome a resistance, which is the ethical resistance of the face. Okay? So even murder is in a way the other side. Is very strange, the other side of the impossibility to kill the other. I think that Agamben is more radical because there's no resistance. I mean, there's no ethics in a way. I mean, the other, and he doesn't even talk about the other, their life is absolutely exposed to death, and there's no ethical resistance. You know, biopower is the possibility of exterminating all kind of bare life without even a single ethical concern. I think that for Levinas, even the Nazi has a kind of ethical, no doubt perhaps, but there's a kind of, I don't know, something like a dialectical relationship to ethics. Agamben is much more, I think, much more radical, not, well, bare life is what can be killed without any ethical concern, without any resistance, without any... See what I mean? But you're right. There's something common in the absence of defense, fragility, etc. So we have to produce a new discourse on that. We have to seize maintaining the distinction between bios and zoe. So we have to go beyond the distinction between the symbolic and the natural. And we have to produce a democratic way of erasing that frontier. So it also means that we have to protect our life. We have to protect the we're coming back to religion again with this notion of protecting their life. How is that possible? And okay. And what does that mean to produce the bios of Zoe? To understand that.
Does Agamben ever actually forgo the bifurcation, or does he just relocate it in a way?
So,
between bios and Zoe? Does he really forgo that divide? Or does he really like reformulate it?
Well, both. Because to say we have to produce the bios of Zoe is both an erasure of the distinction and another way to reintroduce it in a different, in re-elaborating it. Right.
What are the implications of preserving it in that religious sense? Do you mean like in like a sacralization, kind of like a remove from use, or what would that mean in terms of preserving the Zoe then? I'm just curious, like with the
I don't know what that means. I don't know, he says, we don't know what that means, we have to invent it. It also appears at the end of the book, in the end of the book. how can a bios be only some zoe? This is both the task and the enigma of Western metaphysics. Okay, when it coincides in biopolitics, zoe, bios, when they coincide violently, we know what that means. Okay, you know that it means that every form of life is killable, that there's no ethical resistance, and it's the possibility of pure evil in a way. So we have to produce a counter discourse on that, and produce the thought of a coincidence between the two forms of life, which is non-violent, which is a kind of preservation. We have to find the bios of our zoe, which means we have to transform our natural life into a way of life. Okay? We don't have to go on opposing the two. We have to transform one into the other. We have to transform our biological life into a way of life. I don't know what that means. It means, I think it means that we have to, in a way, subjectivate our natural life. We have to transform the simple fact of living, our biological being. We have to transform it into something which belongs to us, into something we're responsible for. We have to cease considering that being alive is a simple fact with no implications. We have to cease excluding that. As Heidegger does right at the beginning of Being and Time, Being and Time says, I'm not talking about living beings here, I'm talking about Dasein. We have to cease doing that. We have to understand that the simple fact of life is not something which has been given to us like at random, but we're alive. It's not our decision. Okay? We have to transform that into something different than a fatality, a pure fact. Okay? This is our responsibility. What does that mean? I don't know. This is what I'm trying to... What does that mean? I don't know.
Much later, Agamben has a text entitled "We Refugees." I don't know if you've read that.
Yes, I think so.
What do you think about that?
And what does he say?
He makes a distinction between stateless persons and refugees, and I think.
Oh yes, yeah.
And I think it's something similar to what you just mentioned. That's why I thought about taking this responsibility, or starting to think about how to take this responsibility.
Yeah. So so the structure of our democracies is still very much indebted to Nazism. So this is the thesis, and for that reason we go on excluding their life, and this is the status of the refugees, etc. Okay, our societies are full of examples of the exclusion of their life through refugees, stateless people without IDs, etc. Okay. So of course the political responsibility is to cease excluding these people, but it also means that we have to do something metaphysical in a way. We have to work on ourselves also. We have to cease excluding our own status of refugees, metaphysical refugees in a way. We have to take our bare life into account, and this I don't know what it means. Okay? Well, I mean, I don't know what it means. This is a question. This is something open. I don't think there is a simple answer. This is the task, and I think it is a very important question. I think really it is an important book because of that. Because I think this is the task, both political, as you said, refugees, and philosophical. That we have to invent a new discourse. We have to seize reasoning, like Lacan precisely opposing biological death to symbolic death, or Heidegger, etc. We have to seize distinguishing between authenticity of existence and death, between this and like animality, naturality of life. So we have to find the bios of our zoe, transform naturality of life into a way of life. But the only thing what I will develop here is that, and is my problem, of course, is that clearly we have also, according to Agamben, to protect their life against biology. Okay? This is the end of the book, as I said. The last 5 chapters, like biology is a threat to their life. And according to me, this is a very bad sign. Because I don't see how you can produce the bios of zoe if you exclude biology from the debate. I mean, so, this is the only thing I know, is that I think he's taking the wrong way to try to solve this problem. I think that excluding biology is a way of reintroducing the distinction, etc. I don't see how you can produce the bios of your zoe without taking the biological definition of zoe into account. I don't see how. Okay, so this is the only thing I know, is that if we want to produce the bios of our zoe, which this is a project which I perfectly agree with, but it is impossible to exclude biology again.
It's been a while for me in the text, but the idea of the sacred, obviously is the main crux of the point there, and I can't remember exactly if it's like the taking away of the
Sorry,
sacred.
excuse me?
If it's the taking away of the sacred, or if it's the stripping of the sacred is what becomes the bird life. If I'm thinking about it correctly, I think it might have some clues to answering what we're questioning around with this re-entering, adding the bios back into the zoe. I don't remember if somehow what he's saying about the sacred is like an addition or a subtraction somehow may help with that. I can't correctly remember it.
You understand the problem is that it is very difficult, it's very complex, the book is very complex, because if you say their life is what is included by its exclusion, now we have to erase the distinction between, because zoe has always been excluded, right? To talk like that, to use the very language of exclusion, right? To speak this very language of something which is outside is precisely the way in which symbolization is produced. As soon as you say something is excluded from, something is different from, you're producing a symbol. You see the problem?
And I guess that my train of thought is maybe a complete forgetting of the idea of the sacred.
No.
If this is a solution, if there is no sacred.
The problem is, how is it possible to talk about their life without immediately reconstituting it into the form of symbol? Okay? That is, you remember what we said yesterday about Lévi-Strauss. If bare life is what has always been excluded, then we can consider that it is a pure zero value. And if we go on considering bare life as a zero value, then we're just transforming it into a symbol, into something sacred. So I will examine what sacred means. This will be my second point in a moment. But you know the problem, and Agamben is very aware of that. He says, now we have to produce the bios of our Zoe. We have to take both into account. Because Zoe has always been excluded. But if it has always been excluded, it means that it was a zero value thing. So it means that it was another kind of symbol. So how will we get rid of symbolization once and for all? How can we be able to give up the vocabulary of exclusion, of symbolization, of, you know, of the constitution of the sacred? Because to say this is excluded, I don't want to see it because I include it by an inclusion. I include it by an exclusion. It means I'm sacralizing this thing. It's the same logic as in Freud. Something you don't want to talk about plays as a kind of sacred thing, fetish. You know, this is the very root of fetishization. I don't want to see that. I don't want to talk about that. Yes, but it will be reintroduced by this very exclusion. And it is a kind of sacralization, you know, when Freud says, I don't want to talk about my mother. You remember this text on the negation, disavowal. Freud says, sometimes my patients say, well, I said to my patients, oh, but you're talking about your mother. And the patient said, no, my mother, I don't want to talk about her. And Freud says, this is the very proof. You're including her by excluding her. And this is the very process of sacralization, which is another form of symbolization. And of course, Agamben is dealing with this problem. He says, when I said that bare life is excluded, I know that in a way it is a fetish. I don't want to fall into that trap. Like, I don't want to fetishize bare life. I don't want to reconstitute it as a form of sacred entity. Okay? And this is also what could be the critique I could be exposed to as well. Are into fetishizing, biological life by saying that it is always excluded, that we have to take it into account, that we have to. You see what I mean? So, yeah, the problem is very complex. Can we really put an end to sacralization? Or do we have to admit that it is inevitable? I think Agamben will say it is inevitable, but we have to be aware of it. And perhaps if we become aware of the inevitability of sacralization, perhaps it's a way of desacralizing. But it's not simple. Is it time to? Yeah. Would you want to say something just before we?
It's also it's very much in the language itself. And could we relocate the language in Zoe?
Yeah, you're right. This is
it's all it goes back to, he starts with etymology. He's already starting that.
In the symbol,
in the symbolic
symbolic
of the Zoe, in the Bible,
no, you're right.
he's putting this entire heritage on himself that he cannot get out of.
This
and
is
if
very
the
true.
language would not be a mind, a bios thing, but a Zoe, the language belongs to the body of the Zoe.
You're quite right.
And stop intellectualizing language. I mean, making it
There's a lot.
that the language is a
There's a lot of neurobiological research to try to understand language coming from
From Zoe.
From Zoe.
Yeah,
From
exactly.
sensory motor
Yeah,
experience.
yeah. It's
but the
interesting.
difficulty is also
Very
that
interesting.
they put a lot in the brain, and then the brain is often seen as the mind rather than
But
the
it
body.
also, in Agamben, he will, so he doesn't talk about the brain because he hates that. But he looks for poetic, like just in Derrida, poetic ways of expressing Zoe, because you're quite right, this is the problem. How can you root their life into such a symbolic background of greed. But he says we have to find a way of speaking which would neutralize all this symbolic. And you know the example is Biopolitics.
Yeah.
Just I'm not convinced, but you know, we have to invent a new language. But I'm not convinced either. I don't know. I shall.